Hey guys, it's Matt. We can use this to take a trip back through time. My mother found some old school projects in a cardboard box, gave me this and a few other things. December 1st, 1983, submitted, it looks like a newspaper, but it's a series of newspaper clippings. We had to highlight or label each part of a newspaper. What's the cut line? What's the date line? An example of a classified ad, an example of a filler feature, an example of a syndicated column, a biographical sketch, all the different elements of a newspaper. And as I started to open this up, the first thing I thought, you know what I'm thinking, there's going to be things in here that jump out, reality giveaways, 33s, gematria, strange stories. I expected to find it. It wasn't riddled, okay? Reality still has to keep up a good showing from time to time. It wasn't riddled, but there's enough here to talk about. Now, once we get through that and the 33s and, uncanny deduction would say, Matt, you expected to find these things. Therefore, you influenced reality itself. I wish I could be there with him. I'd like to think that. I really do. As because this happens so often, I don't think it'll take a gigantic sample size for me to actually believe that. I mean, I'm already talking about the conspiracy generation machine, where people expect to find certain breadcrumbs and the reality artificially delivers it. In a way, it's going on here. I know it's hard to reconcile. Was it a retrocausality? We shouldn't make it too complicated. Let's look at the stuff that jumped out at me in terms of like the synchronicities and the quote coincidences and the stuff. As I opened it up, I knew there would be this sort of stuff. It's up to you whether you believe it's made up apophinia or not. And then we can take a trip back through time, read the George Will editorial about fiscal policy and all that nonsense that we can see through, that we believed back in the day. Well, most people still believe it. All right, here we go. My mother also found at the top this bird coloring book from, this was elementary school, maybe second or third grade or something like that. I'm turning a page every day, learning a different bird. It's like me from the past helping me from the future. This one's the meadowlark. And a lot of these birds we don't have here. So I'm thinking, did the ecosystem evolve in such a way the DDT and the Agent Orange and whatever other chemicals, the Roundup, killed all these birds off because half of them don't exist anymore? Like, did these birds really exist in our area? The first thing I thought about when I saw this a few days ago, picked up the old project, was just the simpler time period, the simpler era that we lived in. At what age would kids be using the internet to do this project, or iPads, or whatever the school gets them? It was so much simpler back in the day, more human, more natural. Okay, do a newspaper project. Here are the components. Let's learn about the components in class this day. Go get a newspaper. Next week, submit it. Cut and paste. Use tape, Elmer's glue. Half the time you'd bring your project in from school, you wouldn't cover it up and it would start raining. It would get all messed up, screwed up. Some kid would attack you at the bus stop. You'd have to have a fight or something and your project would get all dirty. It was just a more simpler time. What would be the equivalent project for today's kid of a similar grade and age? You go out and screenshot the different ways to get into Facebook and chat apps. Chat GPT. What the hell would the kids be doing today? Certainly not this. Maybe there'd be like an archaeological experiment today where if you could find a newspaper. I think they actually still have them, believe it or not. The Sunday edition is in the Wawa still. I can't believe that. But what would be the equivalent project today? Greg and I and you, I'm sure, we wouldn't go back. Someone said, oh, if somebody could wave a magic wand, Matt, and make you 25 again, oh, you'd take it. No, I wouldn't. Absolutely not. I would pay to have the person with the wand stay away from me. I don't want to be one day younger than I am now. I thought this was ironic. We had, for all the clippings, and I'll show them to you in a moment, we had to just bind it together to make it look like a newspaper. And of course, everybody just hand drew everything. The teachers looked the other way. You didn't get marks off of your penmanship, or your hand drawings were lousy. And of course, mine were terrible. I could do much better then than I can do today. But the way I came into truth, the way I came into truth, like watching Russian vids break down all the questionable mall events and school events. There was one yesterday here in Philadelphia. I don't care to look at it. I don't care. Some of them are going to be legitimate and real. Some of them aren't. I don't give a crap anymore. But look at the headline. The only headline I have on this project. Headline bot, 3 men shot in West Side shootout. Man, that's kind of redundant. It is, but 3 men shot in West Side shootout. Of all the headlines of all the world, a bang event is what I put on my damn school project. All right, check this out. The very first clipping on the very first page, it's about the Low-Level Radioactive Waste Policy Act of 1980, about the proper disposal of nuclear waste. It says at the bottom, from 1970 to 1980, the volume of such waste soared by 274%, from 883,000 cubic feet to 3.3 million cubic. What? Oh no. 3.3 million cubic feet. I expected to find something like this right away. It's not riddled with this stuff, guys, but it does pop up more than you would expect. Look at this one, a feature in the 1983 newspaper. 50 years ago today, and don't bother reading the story, the Dental Society of Chester and Delaware counties met. I mean, it's a boring story. 50 years ago, November 25th, 1933, Jeff emailed me just yesterday saying, like, every time I look into something, it's always referencing something back to 1911 or 1933. I think he just emailed me that yesterday. I thought this was interesting. 2 basketball players are shown here waiting for a rebound. Sampson left, that's Ralph Sampson, and Moses Malone. Sampson left and Malone hook up inside the first period. Okay, I thought this was rather interesting. Sampson, biblical reference. Moses, now he was known as Moses. Nobody called him Malone. How many points Moses have last night? That's all you did. It's Moses from the Bible next to Sampson. One is the heir apparent to the other. This is the year the Sixers won the championship. Moses was the catalyst to finally bring Dr. J the first championship. If anybody's interested in that, it was a heck of a season. I remember watching almost every game. But what does this mean? Moses, the biblical Moses combined with Samson. What does it mean? And there's a further relationship because the Houston Rockets traded Moses to the Sixers, Philadelphia 76ers, and then because they're going to draft Samson. So he's now on the Rockets taking Moses's place, if you can believe them. What does this mean? The specifics of it is probably Metroid. Nothing. Absolutely nothing. The whole of it, the whole of everything we're looking at here, it says the same thing every time we look at shit like this. It says fake world. The various newspapers I was using for the clippings was the week or two or whatever leading up to Thanksgiving. You can tell that from some of the other articles you'll see leading up to its Thanksgiving, the submission of the project in school. It says December 1st. I think my father at the time was getting every day the Philadelphia Inquirer, at least the Sunday edition. So I'm looking at this and I'm like, there's something here. You know, there's something. And well, Matt, you're afo-finning it. You're making something out of nothing. You be the judge of that. Editorial cartoon shows the Pilgrims with their old-fashioned rifles marching with the Indians, and they're going to have the first Thanksgiving, I guess it's saying. They just came off the Pina, the Nina, the Pinta, and the Santa Maria, and the Nina. And the guy in the back has a football uniform on because it's saying Thanksgiving's becoming about football. This pilgrim has a Chicago Bears jersey, a big number 9, carrying a television because he's going to try to watch the game. He don't care about breaking bread with the Native Americans there. So I thought, okay, the 9, all right. But what I'm thinking, okay, well, this is the month of November 11. Well, it's so see the whole issue, the different newspapers about Thanksgiving stressing the month 11. He's wearing the number. Oh no, I don't know. Look, I do see that. I do see some sort of reality trying to do something with this. I do. It would be, guys. The sketch artist isn't in on anything. I mean, if you see this, the way I kind of see it, it's just how this reality plays out, and it's a little bit of a stretch. Look at this one. Really, really. Of all the gin joints in all the world, my little newspaper project has to reference Orwell's 1984. How massive that work has been in, quote, our community. And I just cut and pasted it and glued it into my project. Another 1984 film is in the works. Now, this is the famous film they're talking about. It's like we're going back in time. We are going back in time because the film we know here is in the works. says, with the ominous year of 1984 little more than a month away, George Orwell's predictions of what the world would be like can be measured against the none-too-palatable truth of where we actually stand. Wow, who wrote that? Desmond Ryan. The soothsayer, the Inquirer movie critic, was some sort of channeler. Soothsayer. That's pretty impressive. Now it gets worse, or better. As you can see, I used this as my example, and I wrote a literary allusion lead. Well, I was wrong. The teacher just gave me a check, because I think the teacher's like, are these kids going to really be able to properly quote and reference a literary allusion? Come on, that's more like a college class. He said, if you're at all close, we'll just give them a check. I don't want to deal with this horse shit. Yeah, I was wrong, because here I'm highlighting, it says, Orwell's predictions of what the world would be like. Okay, that's not a literary allusion reference in this newspaper article. There's no allusion at all. It just says in George Orwell's book, it predicts what the future will look like, a dystopian future. That's no allusion, an allusion to allude to something else, to be working over here and to allude to something over here. All the times we've heard Hamlet referenced in a million different TV shows, books, movies, like something rotten in the state of Denmark. Some would say there's something rotten in the corporate construct of Washington, D.C. That's an allusion to Hamlet, for example. So what I did here was wrong. It was horse shit, what I tried to turn in there. The teacher was like, come on. He probably went through, and if I remember who this teacher was, but I think I know who it is, and it's a he, I believe. But I think he went, and so many people were probably getting the literary allusion wrong. We wouldn't understand that horse shit at this point. He just said, if you're even referencing anything, if you're referencing a pile of horse dung, I'm going to give you a check. This is interesting. The headline reads, "The reality is always worse." For this school project to even have a headline that talks about reality is a bit strange, but what follows is not what we would think, but I'll read it to you. 2 days after the showing on TV of The Day After, we'll talk about that. The day after, it was about a nuclear holocaust. The public broadcasting service showed a film that was strikingly similar and strikingly different. Cambodia and Laos, the 9th installment of its seemingly interminable history of the Vietnam War. Compared with the 100 million people who watched The Day After, the imaginary bombing of Lawrence, Kansas by a nuclear bomb, only a minuscule number watched the real bombing of Cambodia in that 9th installment. Of course, people in this country, they don't give a crap what happens to peoples overseas and indigenous peoples. They don't give a shit. Greg and I have recently talked about this airing of The Day After, which I guess was earlier in 1983. It was a gigantic big deal at the time. As kids, we didn't care. That's what Greg and I were talking about, where they were going to show this movie on regular television and show what a nuclear holocaust would look like and try to scare people back into the Cold War and rekindle all that again. Just when people of my era were kind of moving out of it. We didn't hide under our desks. We just didn't give a shit. And I remember talking to Greg not long ago, and I said, Greg, did that movie scare you at all? And the teachers even tried to scare us. Oh, you got to watch this tonight as part of the school project, and you got to write a paper on it. So the whole country watched it. Every school kid watched it. And Greg was like, that didn't scare me one bit. And I said, it didn't scare me one bit either. We talked about it further. They still kept, when we were young, this Soviet threat of nuclear war and the SALT treaty with Carter or whoever. We knew it wasn't going to happen. And Greg was like, you remember how much they talked about potential nuclear war with the Soviet Union? And the fear always tried to drum it up in news articles in this movie, The Day After. And the whole point was, not once was I or anybody of my age or Greg afraid. It's like the reality the not milk had lost us. Like this group, they're not buying this bullcrap. And I don't want to get into a sidebar whether it's real or they're real or not. It's not the point here. I'm well aware of all those issues. It doesn't matter if they're real. In a one world system, everybody's at the same kumbaya table. So it was almost like one last gasp to try to drum up fear. And somehow, they had, maybe back then they didn't have no social media and they didn't have no thumbs up and thumbs down and internet. Maybe it was more like Gallup polling in the traditional. But then the Not Milk reconvened. Like, we showed all these kids in elementary school and junior high and high school this movie the day after about a nuclear holocaust. Were we successful in drumming up fears and trying to extend this 10-year Cold War? We were not successful. These kids don't give a shit. They're not aware that they see through it, but they're just not buying it. They ain't scared for a second, and we weren't. But again, here what got my attention initially, just the headline, "The reality is always worse." Okay, let's move on. There's another one. This does not disappoint. This is very interesting. I'll look for your comments. "For actress, fantasies are now reality." Really? Considering what we look at, this is a damn headline in my school project. And it gets stranger, guys. "For actress, fantasies are now reality." By Rich Lyman, movie critic, New York. Mary Steenburgen, I've never heard of her. Mary Steenburgen remembers her, quote, "going to sleep dream" from years ago in the quiet early nights back home in North Little Rock. Now, the way this article is written is very strange because it's short, and the takeaway is, well, she is actually becoming now as an actress what she dreamed about as a kid. That's pretty easy to say in an article. She's now starring with Dudley Moore and this and that, and her dreams are coming true at age 30. But why do you use this 4 different times and use it in a way that's hard to understand? This is strange, guys. I need to pause and take a look at this. Mary, I'll read you the four parts. They're not really easy to see on the small print that you're looking at. Mary Steenburg remembers her going to sleep dream from years ago. Who puts it like that? Going to sleep dream. Okay. The next column over, it starts 1 paragraph down. "You know what I mean by a going to sleep dream, right?" Who puts it like that? The final paragraph on the right, middle way. "It's funny to have your going to sleep dream come true." Blah, blah. And at the bottom, it's referenced again. Suddenly it occurred to me, what's the going to sleep dream now? Okay, who puts it that way 4 times in a little article? Matt, what are you saying? I don't know. But I'm going to pause and look at this poor shit. I'm back. I still don't know what it means, but I just wanted to say this. It's written by Rick Lyman, the Philadelphia Inquirer movie critic at the time. Now, everything is reviewed by 3, 4, 5, 6 editors before anything can go to print, of course. He doesn't just, toss it to the guy that prints it out. And these editors, of course, always have the final decision. Now, you would go back. This is a tiny little article. And you don't even really understand it when you read it the first time. Like, what is this going to sleep dream? It took me 2 reads to just say it's just her. She's just living out her childhood fantasy. It's that simple. The editor would go back to this Rick Lyman and be like, why did you reference this in such a weird way 4 times in a tiny little art? And Rick would say something like, well, that's what she said. I mean, we're just quoting her. That's what Mary Steenburg said, according to the AP person that interviewed her. But the editor would then say, well, fine, use it once. Then just talk about she's living out her fantasies. Why are you using this really strange way to put something? Do you know what I mean by a going to sleep dream? The editor would go back and be like, remove 3 references. If she said it as a quote, we'll quote her once and then explain what she means because nobody can friggin' understand it. Right, I'm still stumped. So, I always go back to the basics, go right to the Wikipedia. Who is this Steenburgen? Well, I'm like, that's the mother of the Step Brothers. What was it? Dale and Brennan in Step Brothers? That's the mother. Her name is what? Mary Steenburgen, now age 70. There's still nothing really incredible that jumps off the page at me. Like Jeff will tell you, we'll start diving into this stuff. All the 33s start and all the year 1911s, the year starts. And it says here, Steenburgen had a leading role in the 1979 film Time After Time, for which she won the Saturn Award for Best Actress. She played a modern woman who falls in love with the author H.G. Wells, played by Malcolm McDowell, who she married. Who'd she marry? No, she didn't marry H.G. Wells. He'd long since dead. She married Malcolm McDowell. Now, of all people to marry, like, could you marry Anthony Hopkins, girls, after seeing the Hannibal Lecter role? Could you marry Malcolm McDowell after watching A Clockwork Orange? Of all movies that are hard to get through and come out the other side and actually have a normal dating life, she actually watched him as that thing in The Clockwork Orange, and then she wanted to date him. I'm not going to spend a lot more time on this, guys. As or how reality works, whatever we take away from this, and maybe, sometimes maybe we look too hard and there's nothing there. But if we do take anything away, obviously this Mary Steinbergen, or whatever her name is, Steenbergen, she isn't in on anything. She didn't know what she channeled or what was being suggested here. It's just reality works in the background. And even at the minion level, very few are aware of even some of the things we notice. So what's interesting, though, the title, For Actress, Fantasies Are Now Reality. This is generally what reality is trying to do to everybody right now. They're trying to make a fantasy world become a reality. So someday people step into the digital. Or we've toyed with this almost like a joke, but it is becoming too real. That one day, and people, real smart people in our community have actually said this, and they actually believe this, that we have stepped into a reality and we don't even realize it's not the original or base reality. That is possible. Elon Musk dropping his little, all he does is read his cue cards, but his bull crap about the chance of this being our base reality or original reality is 1 in billions. I mean, everything, there's always a roundabout way to interpret the nonsense that comes out of his mouth. There is truth in it, typically, but it's a roundabout truth. He's never going to give us any information we can use. These idiot truthers, there's a small percentage of us that actually believe Elon Musk is actually on our side, which is just comical. If anybody could ever get into one of his press conferences, please ask him this. Raise your hand or go up to the microphone. People are usually a little reticent. They don't want to speak in front of crowds, so you get the first dibs. Elon, I have the first question. Can you name the companies that you own and you're actually running right now? Can you name them all? I don't think he would be able to. He would go, Solar City, SpaceX, Tesla. I don't think he would know. He might cite that flamethrower company. I don't think he would know, but he's supposed to be running them all. Let's wrap this up. I will look to your comments. We have the title, For Actress, Fantasies Are Now Reality, and we have 4 uses in a tiny little article of the term a going to sleep dream. That's what everybody around us, I guess, on the Ship of Fools is doing. Why that's used 4 different times, that does get my attention, but we have to move on. Doesn't matter one bit to us whether we know exactly what's being said or not. We see through it all when we're doing the work. We have our armor. It doesn't matter. All right, guys, here's another one. I think the reality breadcrumb stuff is done. I mean, how many reality weird breadcrumbs and things to talk about can there be in a school project? There's probably going to be more, but I'll just go into some other things here. Headline, a Christian school stands up to the United States. Grove City, PA. At Grove City College, you meet the kind of girls you marry, says senior Randy Oates. Grove City College, a conservative, adamantly Christian, may be on the threshold of a landmark U.S. Supreme Court battle to preserve the old-fashioned lifestyles and outlook that thrive on its serene 150-acre campus. The school's fighting the federal government to maintain what longtime trustee J. Howard Pugh calls its freedom to inculcate in the minds and hearts of youth those Christian moral and ethical principles without which our country cannot long endure. That's for sure. Inculcate, guys, principles, instill these principles, to inculcate. Not a word I would choose, Mr. Pugh, but to instill these types of principles. The issue at the bottom, it's a cutoff. We had to use only samples, so the full article's cut off. The issue is simple. Does the aid that the federal government supplies, we don't have any more from the bottom, but that's it, isn't it? The federal government, they figured this out a long time ago. They're evil genius in this regard. Provide a little bit of aid, provide a nonprofit status to a church, and then, you got to do what we say, or you wait, if you're them, or the not milk, you wait until the organization, or the church, or the nonprofit relies on its tax preferred status, or you wait until this Christian school relies on the aid it gets from the federal government. Then once it's reliant upon that teat, you step in and go, you got to change your ways. You can't do this and that and this, or we're going to pull the money. That's why you just, under all circumstances, you never take it from the federal government. I never took a penny from Google Ads. Did not want to be reliant upon it. I'm not. Never took a penny. So, they just don't learn their lesson. You operate away as far as possible from these minions and these elements of the not milk that want to fund you and want to get involved, because they're going to just clean out everything that's good and put into their sticky tentacles and get it all up in your business. The theme of this article is similar. And remember, guys, every article here is from November or sometime right before December of 1983. More math science add up to more school funds. The question of what must be taught in high schools is back in the news again, and that brings with it the unpopular issue of who is going to pay for the curriculum changes. Guys, I don't think they talk about this nearly as much today because of all the trillions printed up weekly by the Fed. But back in the day, if you're over 45 years old, back in the day, everything was about funding. Who's going to pay for it? Who's going to absorb the deficit? In the early and mid-'70s, the Bronx was all burnt out, empty buildings, looked like Beirut, looked like a war zone. Parts of Brooklyn were very bad, and there's no funds for it and no funding. In New York City, to keep shutting down, and all services get shut down because there's no money in the state and no money in the city. Of course, the Fed could have just magically printed up whatever they needed overnight, but it was more of a manual printing process. We'll talk about why potentially they didn't. There is never a shortage of funds anywhere. Then or today, the Fed can create magic money. Maybe it was a much larger inflationary concern back then. We'll talk about that on the back end. But back in the day, I don't think that the funding is a big of a deal today because of so many trillions printed up weekly and so much money thrown about. They don't want people even thinking about where the money's coming from. But back in the day, it was a huge issue. And the federal government didn't step in and bail out very much. If a city needed to shut down for a week because it couldn't pay trash workers, it just did. That just doesn't exist today. All right, now on the far right, well, second to last column, I'll read to the end. In announcing his school improvement program, Governor Thornburgh of Pennsylvania said the state would spend $10 million in the first year for curriculum changes and eventually would spend $40 million a year. But he did not say where the money would come from. Just like any other politician, $40 million pittance. Wow, that's really big of you. But even back then, that wasn't a lot of money, guys, for schools. Give me a break. The problem of curriculum costs and whether the state would share them with the local schools was one reason that the House Educational Committee, blah, blah, this just threw up into my mouth. Let me just round this out. Second to last paragraph. The House Committee, which wants to legislate curriculum changes, feels that, quote, if the costs are going to be mandated, this type of thing ought to be done through legislative action. Okay, of course they want to legislate it. The not-milk won't allow anybody to go into Congress or the Senate that doesn't want to just have more and more laws and more legislation and more rules. It just like metaphysically can't happen in this reality. If you were a congressman or a senator that actually and truly wants to just cut everything, don't tell me about Ron Paul. I don't want to hear about Ron Paul and how he was used to lure in the conservatives and that false story. What a bunch of bullcrap. If you want to just legislate and put in 1,000 more laws and you really believe that's how everything should be fixed through more laws, the not-milk will just love you and it'll probably take you right to the Senate. If there's somebody over here that's really charismatic and really has good ideas and says, we can cut half of government in this area, the not-milk doesn't like that. That person would never have a chance in hell of winning an election. If he or she was actually winning and about to win, they'd cook up some sort of scandal on that person that just wanted to cut government at the last minute. A scandal. He wanted to date gerbils, and it was well known throughout his college class that he was actually dating gerbils. And then that would come to the news right before Election Day, and the person that wanted to cut government would never even be able to get a job again for the rest of their life other than baking bread at Tasty Cake. Back to the funding issue, or why everything in the 70s and 80s was about who's going to pay for it. And who's going to float the bonds? And will the bonds be bought up? And will the city have to shut down? And then the federal government basically did adopt that with government shutdown. I mean, complete show. Of course, a complete show. An absolute fantasy, storybook, fairy tale joke. They didn't have to shut down for a second. They just have to make it look good, have to make the system believable to the people. The Fed could have stepped in and gave them whatever they needed, of course. But the reason for this is the federal government had the ability to print up the trillions in the 70s and 80s as well through the Fed, but I don't think they didn't have the super computers. They didn't have maybe the AI they have now. They didn't have a way to keep inflation in check. And inflation did get, out of control in the late 70s, and what they had to bump interest rates up to 15 or 17 or 18%. Maybe they did start printing up, and maybe that is what led to the inflation. And they said, we can't do this because we can't manage it properly. Now, why they've been able to insert the hundreds of billions of dollars a week off books, things we'll never hear about, or the trillions of dollars, some say, since the 2008 quote crisis. I mean, you'll actually talk to people. I've talked to people in my family, and I'll say to them that we probably printed up $40 trillion or $50 trillion to keep everything going. No big companies have gone out of business. The Me should have driven 50 big companies out of business. Nobody ever goes under. And then people in my family will say, Matt, they can't do that off book. You're aware of the Fed balance sheet. Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, yeah. The Fed balance, these honest people are going to be honest about what they're printing up. And it's just a rule of this reality that they couldn't print up 50 trillion over here and then just show you a balance sheet of 5 trillion. No, it's completely to be believed. Come on, sir. These people in my family are idiots that would say to me the Fed balance sheet. Of course it's printed off books, but the supercomputer today, or the AI, is so perfect in doing the money injections, in my opinion, in such a way that the inflationary effect is tiny compared to what it would be if they printed up a similar amount of money in the 70s or 80s. Somehow the supercomputer, the AI, whatever, it knows. I know inflation's bad, guys. Shrinkflation. You go to get paper towels, and there's like 10 towels. They're going to charge you the same, but there's 10 towels around a cardboard roll. I understand that, but it's still, considering the trillions and trillions that they've, quote, printed up, and that just means injected wherever it needs to be, mostly to municipalities and states. The inflation should be, you've heard me say this, we'll move on, should be much, much worse. It should be, $15 for an apple now. Considering what they've printed, it's actually been kept in check. I think only a sophisticated AI system or supercomputer managing the money injections could do that. Look at this horseshit article. Wouldn't that be funny, guys, if I did that if I knew what I knew now back when I submitted this paper, I could write a little note. This article is real, teacher. See, this article is highly questionable, teacher. This article is completely cake in a lake. Every time I say it reminds me, I haven't even shown Jen's drawing yet. I apologize, Jen, and people send me stuff, and it takes me forever to get to it. I forget, and then I'll do it. I definitely will do it. Teacher, see this? I'm submitting this article as an example for, what was the example here? I called it a summary lead off to the right. You can't see it. I wrote summary lead. See, teacher, this article is horseshit. It's fake news. I don't think that would go over well when this was submitted. Everybody now believes everything. Anyway, Matt, get to the damn point. Sorry, let me read it. 3 tons of gold stolen in London. 6 hooded gunmen yesterday stole an estimated 3 tons of pure gold from a warehouse near Heathrow Airport. Here, after dousing security guards with gasoline and threatening to set them afire. A fire? Who's the editor that approved this? Continuing to read, the haul, valued at $37.5 million, was the richest in British history and one of the biggest of all time. Insurers offered a reward of $3 million for information. Oh no! A reward of $3 million. 3 tons of gold stolen. Oh no! Are they doing the 33? Maybe. Well, let me just continue to read. For recovery of the loot, which also included a small quantity of diamonds, the value of which was not determined. Police said the gold bullion at the it was real high security, warehouse was 6,800 bars, awaiting shipment to the Far East. Who's the Saudi Sultan Sheikh that didn't get their shit? That person's going to be pissed. Why does this seem like a Goodfellas movie dry run, or like a screenplay? But that Bill knows Henry Hill. Bill has met Henry Hill, the guy from Goodfellas. So I don't know how much. Bill could probably tell us how much of Goodfellas is actually correct. But this seems like a Goodfellas screenplay dry run in a real news article, which is actually fake. Police said 6 members of the security staff were in the warehouse about 6:40 a.m. when the gunman broke in, somehow averting detection by the piece of shit surveillance cameras mounted outside the building. Boy, I tell you, that crack security crew, that's what you get for paying $12 an hour guarding $87 million of gold. You get what you pay for. Regarding the crack, half of them were drunk. 2 were asleep. One guy was playing Tetris, if it even existed at the time. You get what you pay for. Freaking warehouses. Again, this was like Goodfellas. The gunmen wearing ski masks and armed with handguns handcuffed the guards and then poured gasoline over them, police said. Where before it said that it threatened to light them a fire. Why would they have to light them a fire if they had the guns? Isn't that punishment enough? Putting a gun to... whatever. They threatened to ignite it, but they did not do so. Did it really? He really write that? But they did not do so. A Scotland Yard statement said, they don't use contractions at the Scotland Yard. It continued, no shots were fired. They were water pistols, man. They ain't got no guns in the UK. That's why they had to douse them with gasoline, dumb sons of bitches. There wasn't no guns. It said replica, like that scene with Bullet-Toothed Tony and Snatch. Let's do a few minutes on this nonsense. I labeled it editorial and got a check. Much to give thanks for. Editorial, 1983, Philadelphia Inquirer. As I told you, it was all about right about Thanksgiving. I'm pulling all these articles. As America's paused to enjoy the Thanksgiving holiday, there is much to be grateful for. Despite the nuclear threat, despite the potential for global conflict, despite the failures of government and the private sector to solve the many social problems of modern life, problems that have beeviled man for centuries, there is much indeed to be thankful for. Well, thanks for squeezing that in at the end. I thought this would actually be one of these rare positive articles or editorial. The editorial could start with, the news is so damn negative all the time. Fire on West Oak Lane. Men shot on West Oak Lane. Fire on West Oak Lane. This person thrown out of work. I thought it would actually be positive. It said much to give thanks for. And then started with the negative, the negative, the negative. That's the way the Not Milk has to do business. If the editorial person, first we'd never get to that position, the Not Milk would never allow it. But if the editorial writer wanted to actually give real thanks and uplift people spiritually, the Not Milk would have none of it. They'd throw their ass out on the street unemployed before you could even blink. So one sentence, and then it says, enjoy the Thanksgiving holiday, but there's the nuclear threat. Here's what the subconscious, the unconscious hears. You got the nuclear threat, potential for global conflict, failures of government, and somebody's calling me. Stop it! Just we're getting to the good parts. Look, guys, the Not Milk has never changed how it does business. Always will remind you of the negative. We'll end with a stalled century example. Dr. Gloom doesn't love Rosie. By George F. Will. I saw this and went, George Will. I thought, is this guy still around? I know this is 1983. He was huge in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. Still big today. I looked it up. This guy can't still be working. He must be kaput even. I'll give you 2 guesses. He's still working, still going, like the Energizer Bunny. He writes regularly for the Wall Street Journal, the Washington Post, and does regular commentary still for NBC News at 81 years old. The sample size we have for Stalled Century is so massive at this point. Of course, there's something to it. I wish I could interview George Will. Say, George, don't you have like $50 million in the bank? I mean, you're not some major Alec Baldwin celebrity, but you've had book deals and celebrity, and you've gotten this deal and that deal. And don't you want to go off in the world and just do something? Don't you just want to sit on the pyramids? Like, what was that? The Bucket List with Morgan Freeman and Jack Nicholson? Isn't there any? You want to just keep working and get your 5 or 6 weeks vacation? You built that up over 90 years of work. I mean, don't you have anything you want to do or just relax? I don't think a certain type of minion, or somebody that's gone too far under the dragon's wing, we've just seen too many examples of this. If you talk to your friends and family about this, they parrot the same scripted responses. Matt, once somebody has a taste of celebrity, let me explain how it works, Matt. They don't ever want to leave the limelight. They can't. But you know what? There's probably more truth to that than, I've cut up those that have run those scripts many times over the years. But if you're a certain type of minion or certain type of thing under the dragon's wing or certain type of golem creature of this reality, a certain minion may not be able to leave the limelight like a Tom Brady. They may need the energy. Maybe somebody that, if it was Real Boy Pinocchio, gave away so many soul tokens, they can't produce their own energy like you can, like I can. They need to feed they can't leave the limelight. I think this is becoming more possible because it either is a certain type of entity or it's developed into a certain type of entity where it can't stop working because that is its sustenance. That is its spiritual or soul energy. They would go kaput very quickly where you and I wouldn't. We could go off to a beach and be very happy, being comfortable by ourselves or with a loved one, just a few people reading and contemplating. These people can't do that. They may very quickly wither, like the way when you pull a flower out of the ground, within hours it starts to wither. That might be what happened to this sort of entity if it ever leaves the limelight. This Tom Brady or any of them. Terry Bradshaw. He's going on 90 years and NFL Sunday. Barely talk. Let me tell you what the running back did. It didn't sound like him, but you get the point. Let me read just one paragraph from this. Then I'll talk about what's being said and wrap it up. But look at this. It's about fiscal policy, the U.S. government. They might have to raise taxes to cover expenses, all the bullcrap they talked about in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. They don't talk about it now because it's so fake, fiscal policy, so made up, they don't even want to call attention to it. So they just ignore it like it doesn't exist. On its current course, by 1988 or 1989, the government will be spending at least $80 billion just to pay the interest on the $1 trillion in new debt that will be run up in the next 5 or 6 fiscal years. $80 billion on the debt. There's been years where they've had to come up with $1 trillion just to service the interest. All, guys, we know it's all BS, but look at this. $1 trillion in new debt over 5 or 6 years. Hey, George, I'd like to talk to him when he wrote this in 1983. These governments are racking up over $1 trillion a year. What do you have to say about that? He was, that can't possibly ever happen. The system would have had to have collapsed. But no, see, we realized 5 years ago it's all fake. It's run like a video game, so that's why it doesn't collapse. George, I mean, all he's doing here is just spouting the official narrative of what the Fed would want the American people reading about. That's why he thinks he's so smart. George Will is so educated. He's not in on Matt. Surely George Will knows how fiscal policy really works in the United States. No, he does not. Absolutely not. Even now, he probably doesn't. If you are some sophisticant, if that is a word I just made up, and you went to this college and that college, and you're so smart, and you present what the Not Milk once presented in a smart, intelligent way, so it will be believed in by the idiots, you will get ahead in this world. That's why people like you and me are kept down. Thanks for listening.